So I'm talking today about integrating AI into radiology workflow. Now, it's not a surprise to anyone here that healthcare faces some headwinds. We have precision medicine, which has incredible promise, but raises expectations and requires far greater information about patient and condition. We have an aging population. The number of over 65s in the US has doubled in the last 20 years. And imaging studies are increasing in size and complexity. There's been a 5-fold increase in the number of images in the decade to 2015 that are hitting with every study. And there are fewer radiologists than ever to share the load. But we're all here because we believe that AI offers fantastic promise, both from commercial products and from models developed by researchers in institutions, as we've just heard about from Fernando. But we all see this massive potential, but if you walk into a hospital and ask to see their AI, you'll generally see blank faces. So why do we not see AI in clinical use at vast scale? Why hasn't AI been adopted? Well, adoption of AI in healthcare is certainly starting, but we're yet to see deployment at scale. While some of this delay is due to the impact on budgets and access caused by the pandemic, there are underlying issues that challenge adoption. There are several elements that are critical to the successful deployment and subsequent adoption of AI, and it's helpful to think about where the pinch points exist. Now, I find it useful to think about this in terms of layers of a pyramid, where the area of each level reflects the ease of access to that layer. At the bottom of the pyramid, we have the underlying AI technology, which through global effort across many industry and research sectors is now highly developed, and in many cases available as open source libraries. The cloud, and particularly the availability of GPUs in the cloud, mean that effectively limitless computational resource is available at very low cost. The next tier up is data for training and validation. In our field of medical imaging, any sizable hospital has huge quantities of data. While we continue to hear data is the new oil, the truth behind the analogy is that it's far more valuable when refined than when it's in its crude form. But that refinement or annotation or labeling of this data can be gained through, depending on the challenge, NLP of the accompanying reports, assessment by trained radiologists, or external annotation services. The next step up is clinical context. This is where successful applications begin to be differentiated. There's a big difference in clinical value between an algorithm that detects nodules and a product that detects, measures, characterizes, and classifies, and generates a report that references the relevant clinical guidelines and is even configurable to any local variations on them. Now, most of the companies that have survived in the market thus far have reached this point. The next challenge, though, is significantly harder: to deliver the information into radiology workflow in a way that adds value to the radiologist and referrer, such that impact flows to the patient. And that's really the subject of this talk. The final hardest tier is the generation of a business model for adoption by the practice or facility. Now, we have a lot of experience in this area, but with only 10 minutes, I'll save that for a future presentation. So let's focus on the radiology workflow aspects. Now, the lowest common denominator is that AI would generate a report and drop it into the archive. But this misses the point of workflow integration. You can't just throw an AI result at a clinician and hope they can be productive with it. So let's look at the various steps and how AI can interact. The first step is the order. Integrate here to get far richer information about why the patient has been imaged than anything you'll find in the DICOM header. This is critical because many of the most useful AI models are highly condition specific, and you need to know when to apply them and when to not waste resources, either AI or human. The second step is the modality itself. Now, it's critical that the technologist knows what they have to acquire. And for a study that's intended to be passed through an AI model, that might be a slightly different protocol to normal. If an essential series is missed, it might negate the ability of the AI model to do its work. Next, we look to the archive. An AI model needs to know when a study has arrived in full and is ready to be processed. Achieving this processing such that the answer is ready when the radiologist needs it is key. Much of the benefit of an AI model dissipates if you keep a clinician waiting. Now, obviously, DICOM is the default transport mechanism for those studies, but bear in mind that you may need more sophisticated orchestration direct from the modalities, or to prefetch priors, to deal with spatially distributed environments such as teleradiology. Now we look to the radiology work list. We're all familiar with triage, escalating studies that may have urgent findings up the work list. But also there are times when it would be appropriate to delay a read until all the information has been processed and is available. So notifications in the work list are key too. Then we get to the read itself. It's great to show a result, but it needs to be in the context of the rest of the read. And the radiologist needs to have the ability to accept or reject that finding. The clinician has to stay in control. And then we report. And for true efficiency, that needs to be slick and not require redictation. Let's be honest, none of this is easy. Many vendors have taken an alternative strategy and built their own systems that replicate legacy IT with a separate work list, separate viewer, application alerts, etc. That might be perfect for that particular model and may be acceptable for a single product, but what if you need 5 models or 10 models or 100? It's intractable at scale unless you're going to buy everything from one vendor. So let's look at true integration into radiology workflow. First off, it's much harder work. Many vendors and different combination of those vendors at every site. Existing vendors often charge for integration activities, or at least give them low priority. And it requires compromises. There might not be the perfect answer for every use case. There are a lot of legacy systems out there that are only capable of a certain level of integration. And with the complexity of the radiology IT landscape, the cost is intractable for most model creators to support all these different integrations. But there's a bigger problem. Every integration costs resources, both from the vendor and from the site, and there just aren't enough hours in the day to achieve multiple deployments. So for those that know me, it won't come as a surprise that I'd advocate a platform approach that allows you to run all the individual models through a common architecture, integrate into every step of the workflow through one platform and do it one time only. And if you pick the right platform, combine proprietary and generic integrations to get the most out of your existing architecture. And of course, a platform would offer alternative components where necessary to support legacy products. So fundamentally, AI has great promise, but unless integrated into clinical workflow, it will never be productive. Thank you.